What would you do if you walked into your own bedroom and saw your wife with another man? And when you confronted her, she laughed and said, "Why don't you join us?" This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about the suffocating prison of an abusive relationship and the journey to freedom. Stay until the end to see how I finally broke free and rebuilt my life from the ashes. For years, I thought I had found the love of my life. When I met Rebecca Lancaster, she was everything I wasn't. Bold, confident, and captivating. She had this aura that pulled people in, and I wasn't immune to it. I was shy and cautious, but she made me feel alive in ways I never thought possible. Our first dates were like scenes from a romantic movie. She planned everything, the restaurants, the road trips, even the music we listened to in the car. At first, I thought she was just taking care of me in a way I had never experienced. But in hindsight, it was the first sign of control. It started with small things. "Why do you hang out with those friends? They're dragging you down." Or, "You're too nice to people who don't deserve it." I didn't argue because I thought she was right. She made me feel like she was protecting me from the world. When she suggested moving to Chicago together after just 6 months of dating, I didn't hesitate. I left my small-town life behind, convinced that this bold leap was love. But as soon as we settled into our new apartment, cracks started to form. Rebecca began to criticize my every move. "Why can't you ever do things right, Tom?" she'd say if I forgot to pick up the right groceries. Her words stung, but I laughed it off. That's just how she is, I told myself. She's fiery and passionate. But deep down, I was already beginning to feel smaller. Rebecca hated my friends. "They don't appreciate you," she'd say, convincing me to cut ties with people I had known for years. One by one, my connections to the outside world disappeared. My best friend, Mark, stopped calling after I canceled plans for the 3rd time. Even my sister Sarah, my closest confidant, began to drift away. Rebecca made sure I depended on her for everything. She controlled our finances, telling me it was easier if she handled it. She decided where we ate, what we watched, and even how I dressed. I didn't mind at first. I thought it was love. But love shouldn't feel like this. Her temper became unpredictable. She'd snap at me for leaving a dirty dish in the sink or forgetting to text her during my lunch break. Once, I tried to explain how I felt, how her words hurt me. She laughed, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're too sensitive, Tom. No wonder people walk all over you." That was the first time I truly felt trapped. The first real fight Rebecca and I had wasn't about anything important. It never was. I had forgotten to pick up her favorite brand of coffee from the store. It was late, and I was tired, but that didn't stop her from unleashing her anger. "You can't do anything right, can you, Tom?" she snapped, her voice cold as ice. I tried to apologize, to explain that I'd had a long day at work, but she cut me off. "Don't give me excuses. You're pathetic." Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat tightened, and all I could do was nod and promise to do better. She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we had gotten here. The woman I fell in love with, the one who used to make me feel like the center of her universe, now looked at me like I was a burden. But I told myself it was just a bad day. Everyone has them, right? The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She even kissed me on the cheek before I left for work, and for a brief moment, I thought things were back to normal. But that night, it happened again. This time, it was about the laundry. "Why do I have to do everything around here?" she yelled, throwing one of my shirts at me. "You're useless, Tom. I should have known better than to trust you with anything." I tried to help, but she didn't want my help. She wanted control. She wanted to remind me that I was beneath her. The fights became more frequent after that, and each time her words cut deeper. She called me names I wouldn't dare repeat. She'd laugh in my face when I tried to defend myself, telling me I wasn't man enough to stand up to her. One night, in the middle of another argument, she threw a glass at the wall. It shattered, the shards scattering across the floor. "Clean it up," she said coldly before walking away. I did as I was told. Rebecca didn't just want me to feel small. She wanted to make sure I had no one else to turn to. She started with my friends. "Why do you still talk to Mark?" she asked one evening as we sat on the couch. "He's a loser, Tom. He doesn't care about you. He's just using you." I tried to argue, but Rebecca always had a way of twisting my words. By the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing for even bringing it up. It wasn't long before I stopped answering Mark's calls altogether. Then she turned her attention to my family. "I don't understand why you're so close to your sister," she said one day as I was texting Sarah. "She's always meddling in our business. She doesn't respect me, Tom." That wasn't true. Sarah had always been kind to Rebecca, even when Rebecca didn't deserve it. But Rebecca's words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Slowly, I began to pull away from my sister, too. Rebecca made sure I had no one but her. And the scariest part was, I let her. I convinced myself that this was what love looked like. That sacrifices had to be made. That Rebecca's anger was my fault, and if I just tried harder, things would get better. But things didn't get better. They got worse. The day I discovered Rebecca's infidelity was one of those moments that replays in your mind like a bad dream. It started innocently enough. I came home early from work, eager to surprise her with takeout from her favorite restaurant. The apartment was quiet when I walked in, the kind of silence that makes you uneasy. I called out her name, but there was no response. Her purse was on the counter, so I knew she was home. That's when I heard it. Faint laughter coming from the bedroom. My heart sank, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was on the phone. I pushed open the door to our room, and there they were. Rebecca was lying on the bed, tangled in the sheets with a man I didn't recognize. She didn't look surprised or ashamed. She didn't even try to cover herself. Instead, she smiled. That same cold, calculating smile she wore whenever she wanted to hurt me. "Oh, you're home early," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. I stood frozen in the doorway, the takeout bag slipping from my hands and crashing to the floor. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The man looked uncomfortable, reaching for his clothes, but Rebecca stopped him with a hand on his arm. "No need to rush," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. Finally, I found my voice. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. She laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed in the room. "Don't be so dramatic, Tom," she said. "It's just a bit of fun. You should try it sometime." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to do anything to make her understand how deeply she had betrayed me. But all I could do was stand there, my chest tight with the weight of her words. And then she said it. The words that would haunt me for years to come. "Why don't you join us? You love being a shadow in your own life anyway." Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands balled into fists at my sides, but I couldn't bring myself to move. She had stripped me of every ounce of dignity I had left, and she knew it. The man, clearly uncomfortable, muttered something about leaving and quickly dressed. Rebecca didn't stop him. She didn't care. When he was gone, she turned to me with an air of indifference. "Are you going to stand there all night? Or are you going to clean up that mess?" she asked, nodding toward the spilled takeout. I should have left right then and there. Any sane person would have. But I didn't. I cleaned up the mess, just like she told me to, because I didn't know how to do anything else. After that day, something inside me broke. I wish I could say it was the start of my rebellion, that I finally stood up for myself. But it wasn't. Instead, it was the beginning of an even darker chapter in my life. Rebecca didn't apologize. She didn't even try to justify what she'd done. To her, it was as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The next morning, she greeted me with her usual cold indifference, sipping coffee at the kitchen table as if the events of the night before had been a bad dream. I didn't bring it up. Couldn't. Every time I thought about confronting her, I heard her words echo in my head. "You love being a shadow in your own life." She was right, wasn't she? That's exactly what I had become. A shadow. Over the weeks that followed, her control over me tightened like a noose. She started making cruel comments with increasing frequency, each one designed to chip away at what little self-worth I had left. "Do you even know how lucky you are to have me?" she'd say while scrolling through her phone. "No one else would put up with you." Her words were like poison, seeping into my mind and paralyzing me. I started to believe her. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't good enough. The isolation became complete. Rebecca had made sure there was no one left in my life to turn to. My friends were gone. My family was distant. And I was too ashamed to admit what was happening to anyone. One night, I tried to talk to her about how I felt. I told her I was unhappy, that I felt like I was suffocating. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Unhappy?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You don't get to be unhappy, Tom. You wouldn't last a day without me." When I didn't respond, she put her phone down and leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Let me make one thing clear," she said. "You're nothing without me. You never were and you never will be. Do you understand that?" I nodded, too scared to say anything else. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized just how deeply she had her hooks in me. I wasn't just her husband. I was her possession, and she wasn't going to let me go. The worst part? A small, broken part of me still loved her. I clung to the memories of the woman I fell in love with, hoping that somehow, someway, she would come back to me. But that woman was gone. Maybe she had never existed at all. It's strange how life has a way of throwing you a lifeline when you least expect it. For me, that lifeline came in the form of a new coworker named Emily. She was a temporary assistant in the marketing department, someone who seemed completely unaware of the storm that raged inside my home. I first noticed her when she offered to help me with a presentation I was struggling to complete. Emily was patient, kind, and, unlike everyone else, didn't judge me for the tiredness I carried in my eyes. She didn't know about Rebecca, of course, but I found myself starting to talk to her about my life in ways I hadn't talked to anyone in years. One afternoon, while we were having lunch at a small cafe near the office, I found myself confiding in Emily more than I intended. "I'm just so tired," I said, staring down at the half-eaten sandwich on my plate. "I don't think I can keep going like this." Emily looked at me with concern in her eyes, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to do this alone, Tom. You're stronger than you think." Her words were simple, but they hit me with a force I hadn't expected. It had been so long since anyone had expressed care for me that I didn't know how to handle it. I felt something stir inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope is a dangerous thing when you've been crushed for so long. I didn't know how to let myself believe in it, even for a second. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I became friends. She was the one person who could make me laugh, who reminded me of a life outside the suffocating walls of my apartment. It wasn't romantic, but I didn't know what to call it. It was the first real connection I had felt in so long, and it made me realize just how far I had fallen. But as much as I enjoyed spending time with her, guilt began to eat away at me. Rebecca had never been the type to allow me the luxury of friendship with someone outside our relationship. She'd already made it clear that I was to have no one but her. And so, I kept my distance from Emily, trying to push her away even though I desperately needed her. I knew it wasn't fair to her. I wasn't in a place where I could offer her anything, but I couldn't help the way she made me feel alive. One evening, after a particularly harsh argument with Rebecca, I found myself walking through the city streets, unable to bear being at home. I texted Emily, asking if she wanted to grab coffee. She said yes immediately. When we met, I was a mess. I hadn't showered in days, my clothes were wrinkled, and my eyes were red from lack of sleep. Yet, when Emily saw me, she didn't recoil. She didn't judge me. Instead, she sat me down at a quiet table, listening as I poured out everything. My frustrations, my pain, my fears about losing myself completely. "It sounds like you're in a toxic relationship, Tom," she said gently, once I had finished speaking. "You deserve more than this. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are, who loves you without controlling you." Her words hung in the air like a beacon, but I wasn't ready to hear them. I had spent so long just surviving that the idea of leaving Rebecca felt impossible. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. I was worth more than this. I didn't know if I was ready to fight for my freedom, but I knew I couldn't stay in this prison forever. I had to make a choice. Leaving Rebecca was not something I ever thought I would be capable of. For years, I had convinced myself that I had to stay, that I was somehow obligated to bear the weight of her cruelty, that love meant enduring pain. I had let her destroy me slowly, piece by piece, believing that the only way to keep my life together was to keep her satisfied. But now, sitting across from Emily in that small cafe, I was beginning to see that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't have to accept the life Rebecca had forced upon me. But the thought of leaving her, leaving the only life I had known for so long, was terrifying. Rebecca had always known how to make me feel small, weak, and incapable. Even when I tried to make small changes, she always found a way to reel me back in, to remind me that I was nothing without her. She had manipulated my fears, my insecurities, and even my love for her, twisting them into tools of control. As I walked back to the apartment that night, the familiar dread settled in my chest. The thought of facing Rebecca and telling her I wanted to leave, it was suffocating. My heart raced as I approached our front door. Would she lash out? Would she try to hurt me? Would she try to break me even more than she already had? I stepped inside, bracing myself for whatever was coming. Rebecca was sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to the TV. She didn't even look at me when I walked in, but her silence spoke volumes. I could feel the tension in the room like a living thing, suffocating me. She wasn't going to let me go easily. I knew that. "Where have you been?" she asked, not lifting her gaze from the screen. "Just out for a walk," I replied, my voice small. "You know you're not supposed to go out without telling me. What if something happened to you?" She turned her head, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know why you insist on making my life so hard, Tom." Her words, as venomous as they were, made me feel weak, as if I was the one who had wronged her. For a moment, I almost forgot what had happened, almost convinced myself that maybe she was right. Maybe I was making her life hard. But then I thought about Emily's face, the kindness in her eyes, and the words she had said to me. "You deserve someone who loves you without controlling you." The weight of that truth hit me like a wave. I couldn't stay in this toxic environment forever. I had to make a change. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to find a way out. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice trembling but steady. Rebecca turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "About what?" "About us," I said, my throat tightening. "I don't think I can do this anymore." For the first time in years, I saw something shift in her eyes. It wasn't love. It wasn't even anger. It was something darker, a cold, calculating realization that I was no longer the man she could control. "You think you can just leave me?" she asked, her voice low, almost a growl. "You think you can just walk away like you're some kind of victim?" I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say next. I had spent so long thinking that I was the one who deserved to be punished, that I didn't know how to defend myself. But then I remembered Emily's words again, and something inside me snapped. "I'm not a victim," I said, my voice stronger now, "but I'm not going to live like this anymore. I deserve more than this, Rebecca." Her eyes flashed with anger. She stood up, moving toward me with quick, deliberate steps. "You think you can walk out that door and be happy?" she spat, her voice rising. "You're nothing without me. Do you hear me, Tom? Nothing." I could feel the weight of her words trying to break me, but I stood my ground. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of her. "I'm done being nothing," I said quietly. Rebecca didn't say anything after that. She just stared at me, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. I couldn't tell if she was about to lash out or break down, but at that moment it didn't matter. I knew I had to leave. I had to take that first step toward my freedom, no matter what it cost me. The night I decided to leave was the hardest night of my life. It wasn't because I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't because I doubted my decision. No, the hardest part was knowing what it would do to Rebecca. And yet, in the quiet corners of my mind, I knew it was the only way to save myself. After I spoke those words, "I'm done being nothing," The silence that followed felt like a storm about to break. Rebecca didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. Instead, she stood there, her face pale, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might actually understand. Maybe, for the first time, she saw the man she had broken and realized that I was finally breaking free of her control. But then, without warning, the mask slipped. "You think you're strong?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. "You think you're going to walk out that door and everything will magically get better? You're pathetic, Tom." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there, the weight of her words pressing on my chest. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. The last vestiges of my courage were slipping away. But I couldn't back down now. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, and the coldness in her tone was something I'd never forget. "You're nothing without me. Do you think Emily is going to love you when she finds out what a broken, weak man you are?" Her words stung, but they didn't have the power they used to. She was just trying to manipulate me again, to make me doubt myself. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was cold, calculating, and I knew it. "I don't need anyone to love me right now," I said, finally finding my voice. "I need to love myself." That hit her harder than anything I could have said. For a second, she looked almost vulnerable, like a mask had been ripped off and she was exposed for the first time. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. She took a step closer, her eyes flashing with fury. "You won't last a week, Tom. You'll come crawling back. They always do." I felt a flicker of doubt, but I quickly shoved it away. Couldn't go back. Not to her, not to that life. Without saying another word, I turned and walked toward the door. The sound of my footsteps felt like thunder in the quiet apartment, echoing through the walls. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling, but I didn't stop, and then I was outside. The fresh air hit me like a wave, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I had to get away from her, away from the life I had built on lies and pain. I needed to start over. As I walked through the streets of the city, the weight of what I had done settled in. The reality of leaving Rebecca behind, of breaking free from the life I had known, was overwhelming. I couldn't deny the fear that gnawed at me. What if I was making a mistake? What if I would never find my way out of this mess? What if I was alone forever? But then, I remembered Emily. She wasn't my salvation. She wasn't my escape. She was just a reminder that there was more to life than this. More than Rebecca's cruelty. More than living in constant fear of her wrath. I walked aimlessly for hours, finally stopping at a small park near the edge of the city. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the sky. I sat on a bench and pulled out my phone, staring at it for a moment. Emily's number was still there, a lifeline I wasn't sure I was ready to grasp. But I was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to stop hiding. The decision to reach out to Emily wasn't easy. I had spent so long convincing myself I wasn't worthy of love, of kindness, of anything outside of Rebecca's control. But as I sat there, watching the sky fade into night, I knew one thing for sure. I was worth more than the life I had been living. I typed out a message. "Hey, it's Tom. Can we talk? I need a friend." The screen flashed as the message sent, and for the first time in years, I felt a small spark of hope. The night I sent that text was the beginning of something I didn't fully understand at the time. Reaching out to Emily was like throwing a pebble into a still pond, and I had no idea just how much that small action would ripple through my life. After sending the message, I stared at my phone, waiting for her reply, as if I could somehow force it to come faster. But nothing happened. Minutes passed, then an hour. My pulse quickened. I was suddenly overwhelmed with doubt. Maybe I had crossed a line. Maybe Emily wouldn't want anything to do with me now that I had exposed how weak I truly was. I tried to shake off the fear, but it clung to me. I told myself that I needed to focus on moving forward, not on what I couldn't control. Rebecca was gone, and I had to take steps to rebuild my life. But even as I made that promise to myself, a gnawing sense of emptiness lingered. When my phone buzzed, I nearly dropped it. I held my breath as I read the text from Emily. Of course we can talk, Tom. I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready. I didn't know what to feel. Relief, gratitude, fear. A mess of emotions. I wasn't ready to pour out everything to Emily yet. Not when I still wasn't sure of myself. But her words were like a bomb on a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. We agreed to meet the next day at the same cafe where we'd first spoken. I spent the evening in a daze, pacing back and forth in my apartment. I had no idea what I was doing. Would Emily really understand what I was going through? Could she even help me? Or was I just dragging her into the wreckage of my life? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in this in-between state forever. I had to take control of my life piece by piece. The next day I met Emily. She was waiting at our usual table, her eyes lighting up when she saw me walk in. For a brief moment, I felt like I was back in the world of normalcy, where people didn't hurt each other just for the sake of it, where I wasn't drowning in guilt and shame. Emily was warm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could talk without fear. She asked me how I was doing, and I gave her the usual response, "I'm fine." But Emily wasn't buying it. She saw through the mask I had spent years perfecting. She leaned forward, her expression soft but serious. "Tom, you don't have to pretend with me. I can tell something's wrong. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this." For the first time, I let my guard down. I told her about Rebecca, about the emotional torment, the cruelty, the way Rebecca had made me feel like I was nothing. I told her how I had spent years questioning myself, trying to appease a woman who never saw me as anything more than a tool to manipulate. Emily didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes full of empathy. It felt like the weight of the years I had spent holding everything in finally started to lift. "Tom," she said softly when I was finished, "you've been through so much, but you are not broken. You're not the man Rebecca tried to make you. You are you, and you deserve better than this." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to believe them, but the years of manipulation, the scars left by Rebecca's cruelty, still lingered in my mind. Could I really believe in myself again? Could I trust that I was worth something? But Emily's unwavering belief in me was a starting point. Maybe I didn't have to believe it all at once. Maybe I could just take one step at a time. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. I didn't feel rushed or judged. It was the first time in years that I could just be myself, without the weight of someone else's expectations hanging over me. As I left the cafe that afternoon, something had shifted within me. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be more moments of doubt, of fear, of pain. But I was no longer alone in it. Emily had given me the one thing I had been craving for so long, a chance at redemption. I didn't know where this new path would lead me, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find out. As the days passed, the weight of my decision to leave Rebecca started to settle in. The freedom I had longed for was both a blessing and a curse. I felt lighter in so many ways, but there were still moments when the gravity of what I had done hit me hard. Leaving Rebecca wasn't just about walking away from a relationship. It was about shedding the remnants of a life I had built on fear and submission. It was about confronting the years I had wasted, the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. But no matter how hard I tried to move forward, the shadows of the past still loomed over me. Every phone call I didn't answer, every moment of silence that stretched between Emily and me, reminded me of Rebecca's presence, even though she was no longer in my life. The first time I saw her after I left was nothing short of a nightmare. I had just finished work and was walking to my car when I saw her standing across the parking lot. She was waiting for me, her posture rigid, her eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. At first, I thought I had imagined it, that maybe I was just seeing things, but when she stepped forward and called my name, the reality of the situation hit me hard. "Tom," she said, her voice calm, but laced with venom. "We need to talk." I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected this. After everything, after all the pain, the last thing I wanted was for her to come back into my life. But there she was, like a storm that had followed me. I didn't respond right away. Couldn't. The years of being controlled by her made it hard to even think straight. Her presence felt like a suffocating weight, pressing down on me, making me second-guess every decision I had made. Rebecca took a step closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "You think you can just leave me, Tom? Walk away and live your life like nothing happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to say something, to fight back, but all I could do was stare at her, the ghost of everything we had been hanging between us. "You don't get to leave me like this. You owe me, Tom," she said, her words cold and final. "I made you who you are. I was the one who kept you from falling apart. And now you think you can just forget all of that." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her how much she had destroyed me, how she had crushed every part of me until I couldn't recognize who I was anymore. But I didn't. I stayed silent. She took another step closer. "You think Emily is going to save you? She doesn't know you like I do. She doesn't know how weak you really are." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. But this time they didn't break me. This time they bounced off me. I was done being her victim. "I'm not weak, Rebecca," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I said it with conviction. "And I'm not going back." For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes searching mine, as if looking for any sign that I might change my mind. But there was nothing. There was no part of me left to break. Rebecca's face twisted in anger, but I didn't flinch. "You'll regret this, Tom," she spat. "I'll make sure of it." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like a ghost. The encounter left me rattled. I wanted to believe that it didn't matter, that I had made the right choice. But a small part of me wondered if I had really escaped. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca would keep coming for me, in one form or another. She wouldn't let me go easily. But Emily's words echoed in my mind. "You deserve better than this." It wasn't just a comforting phrase anymore. It was a truth I was beginning to believe. In the days that followed my encounter with Rebecca, a strange sense of quiet began to settle over my life. The fear, the constant tension that had defined my existence for so long, was no longer there. But even in this newfound peace, there was a deep, lingering unease. Rebecca had made her threat, and I couldn't help but wonder when she would act on it. I still had the scars she had left on me. Emotional, invisible scars that I wasn't sure I could ever fully heal. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep looking back. If I was going to move forward, I had to leave Rebecca's shadow behind me, no matter how deeply it still haunted me. Emily had become my anchor. I didn't know what exactly we were becoming, but it didn't matter. Her presence in my life was the only thing that felt real and safe anymore. Every time we spoke, every time we spent time together, I felt a little stronger. She didn't expect anything from me, didn't pressure me to move faster or act differently. She just was, and somehow that was enough. One evening, after another long day of work, I found myself walking to Emily's apartment. We had made a routine of it, even though we weren't official or anything. I didn't want to rush things, and I knew Emily wasn't the type of person to force anything either. But the connection we shared was undeniable. She saw me not as someone broken, but as someone who had the potential to heal. When I arrived, Emily greeted me with a warm smile and a hug. It was simple, but it felt like a homecoming. It was the kind of embrace I had forgotten existed in my life, and I realized just how starved for affection I had been. "How was your day?" she asked as we sat down on the couch, the light from the lamps casting soft shadows in the room. "Same as always," I said, trying to keep things light, though I could feel the weight of my past pressing down on me. "Just getting through it." Emily nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I get that," she said softly. "But remember, it's okay to take a break sometimes. You don't always have to be strong." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long pretending to be okay, forcing myself to keep pushing forward, to keep up the facade of strength. But Emily understood something I hadn't allowed myself to grasp. I didn't have to carry all the weight on my own. That night we talked, for hours, about everything, about our pasts, our hopes, and our fears. It was the first time in years that I felt like I could be vulnerable, without the fear of being judged or manipulated. Emily listened, Not just with her ears, but with her heart. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't tell me what I needed to do. She just let me be. And in that space of acceptance, something began to shift in me. I realized that I was still grieving. I hadn't allowed myself to fully mourn the loss of who I had been before Rebecca's abuse. The person I was before her cruelty had worn me down to nothing. But Emily had shown me that I didn't have to be that broken person anymore. I didn't have to let my past define my future. As I sat there with her, I realized how far I had come. I had made it through the worst of it. I had survived Rebecca, and now I was taking the first real steps toward healing. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was long, filled with obstacles I didn't even know existed. But I wasn't alone anymore. Emily had become the anchor I didn't know I needed, the one person who saw me, not as a project or a broken man, but as someone who was worth the effort of rebuilding. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance. Not just at a better life, but at a real life. The kind of life where I wasn't just surviving, but truly living. The days that followed were like walking a tightrope. I was constantly balancing between the pull of my past and the promise of a better future. I had left Rebecca, but I hadn't truly left the mental prison she had built around me. The walls of fear, self-doubt, and shame still echoed in my mind, and I found myself questioning every decision I made. Was I strong enough to be truly independent? Or would I always be haunted by the ghost of Rebecca's control? It was Emily who first challenged me to confront my fear head-on. She noticed it before I even said a word. The hesitation, the way I still seemed to shrink when things got difficult, like I was waiting for Rebecca's voice to tell me I wasn't good enough. One evening, after a long day, Emily invited me over to her apartment to watch a movie. It was supposed to be a simple, relaxing evening, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that seemed to follow me everywhere. "Tom, can I talk to you about something?" Emily asked softly as we sat on the couch, the soft glow of the TV casting shadows on her face. "Sure," I replied, trying to act casual. But inside, I was already bracing for something difficult. "I think you're still holding on to something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've made so much progress, but I can see that you're still holding back. You're afraid of moving forward, aren't you?" I froze. The truth of her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had tried so hard to convince myself that I was moving forward, that I was strong, that I was free. But in reality, I was still shackled by fear. I had never truly allowed myself to believe that I could stand on my own. I don't know," I stammered, looking down at my hands. "It's hard to just forget everything. It feels like I'm always looking over my shoulder, waiting for something bad to happen." Emily's eyes softened, and she reached out, gently taking my hand in hers. "You don't have to forget, Tom, but you do need to let go. You can't keep living in fear of something that's no longer your reality. Rebecca is gone. That part of your life is over. But you're still holding onto the pieces she left behind." Her words were like a lifeline. I knew what she was saying was true. I had been holding on to the pain, the trauma, like it was all I had left of myself. It was all I had known for so long. But I couldn't keep letting it control me. I had to make a choice. "I don't know if I can do it, Emily," I said, my voice shaking with vulnerability. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I believe in you, Tom, but you have to believe in yourself too." Her words were a challenge, a test, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't keep avoiding it. If I was going to move forward, I had to take the leap. I had to trust that I was strong enough, that I was worthy of the life I was building. The next day, I made a decision. I was going to face my fear. I was going to take back control of my life piece by piece. The first step was simple, but it felt like a mountain to climb. I was going to confront my past head-on. I knew I needed closure with Rebecca. The fear, the anger, the confusion. It had all built up inside me for so long. If I didn't confront it now, I would never be free. I found myself standing outside her apartment door, my heart racing in my chest. I had no idea how this conversation would go, but I knew it had to happen. I couldn't move on without it. When Rebecca opened the door, Her face was a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What do you want, Tom?" she asked, her voice cold. "I just need to talk," I said, trying to steady my breath. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside to let me in. I took a deep breath and sat down, facing her. The old fear, the old power dynamic was still there, hanging in the air between us. But I wasn't the same man I had been. "I'm not here to fight," I began, my voice steady. "I just need to say something. I'm done, Rebecca. I'm done letting you control me. I'm done living in your shadow." Rebecca's eyes flickered with something. Maybe anger, maybe disbelief. But I didn't back down. "I've spent too long thinking I wasn't enough, thinking I had to be something I'm not just to please you. But I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not broken, and I'm not weak." For a moment there was silence. Rebecca didn't speak, didn't yell, didn't try to tear me down like she always had. She just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. And then, finally, she spoke. "You think you can just walk away from all of this? You think you're stronger than me?" "I'm stronger than I was," I said, standing up. "And I'm done with you. You don't get to control me anymore." I turned and walked out the door without looking back. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of her presence following me. I didn't feel her shadow over my shoulder. It wasn't a perfect victory. There were still days when I struggled with doubt, with the echoes of the past. But that moment, that decision, was a turning point. I had faced my fear, and for the first time I was truly free. The days after I left Rebecca felt like a blur. I was finally free, but that freedom came with a cost. I had spent so many years tangled in her manipulation and control that I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I had to rediscover myself, who I really was, outside of the suffocating expectations that Rebecca had imposed on me. Emily had been there, a steady presence in my life, but even her love couldn't erase the emptiness I felt inside. I needed time to heal, to piece together the fragments of my life that had been torn apart by years of abuse. But I wasn't sure how to start. I began by getting my own apartment. It was a small, modest place, nothing extravagant. But it was mine. It felt like the first real step toward independence, toward creating a life for myself without the chains of my past. The first night I spent there, alone in the quiet, I almost couldn't believe it. No shouting, no fighting, no walking on eggshells, just silence. I spent hours unpacking, but not really organizing. The boxes were a distraction, something to keep me busy, to keep my mind from wandering back to Rebecca, to the fear and pain that still lingered. But with every object I placed, every item I arranged, I felt a little more in control. Little by little, I started to reclaim my life. As the days turned into weeks, I realized how much I had lost. Not just the years with Rebecca, but the person I used to be. The person who had dreams, who had hopes, who had a future. I hadn't even allowed myself to dream in so long. I had been too busy surviving. It was Emily who first encouraged me to take that first step back into the world. We were out for coffee one morning when she casually mentioned a book club that a few of her friends were starting. "You should come," she said, almost too casually. "I know you used to love reading. It could be a good way to meet people. Get back to the things you love." I wanted to refuse, to tell her I wasn't ready, that I didn't deserve to be around people who could be happy. But the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself nodding. "I'll come," I said, surprising myself. But no promises. That first meeting was awkward. I hadn't been in a group setting in so long, and the idea of talking to strangers made my stomach twist in knots. But the moment I walked into that small cafe, filled with people laughing, chatting, discussing books, something shifted inside me. There was a world outside of my pain, a world where I didn't have to be afraid. The more I talked to people, the more I realized that I could be part of this world again. I could have conversations without fearing judgment. I could laugh without worrying if someone would use my joy against me. It felt like the first step back into a life I had long ago abandoned. Emily had been right. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to force myself to be someone I wasn't. The process of rebuilding was slow, but it was happening. And with every passing day, I began to feel more like myself again. I also started to confront the anger I had buried for so long. The anger at Rebecca. The anger at myself for letting it go on for so long. One night, after a particularly rough day, I went to the gym. I didn't know what I was doing there. I wasn't a gym person. But I needed to do something to release the tension, the rage that was building inside me. I hit the punching bag until my hands were sore, until the sweat dripped from my forehead and my arms burned. With every punch, I let go of a little more of the anger, the frustration, the helplessness. And for the first time in years, I felt in control. Not just of my body, but of my life. The next day, I called Emily. "I'm doing better," I told her, my voice more steady than it had been in a long time. "I think I'm starting to figure it out." "I knew you would," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "You just had to believe in yourself, Tom." And for the first time, I truly did. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't healed. But I was stronger than I had ever been. As I looked out of my apartment window that evening, watching the sun set over the city, I realized how far I had come. I had left the darkness of my past behind, and though the journey was far from over, I was finally on the path to healing. As the months passed, I began to see the world differently. The shadows of my past, once so suffocating, no longer dominated my every thought. I had moments of peace, of joy, fleeting, yet real. I found myself looking forward to things, to plans, to simple moments. For the first time in years, I started to feel like I was truly living, not just surviving. But there was one final step left for me to take. I had to confront the last remnants of Rebecca's control. It was the hardest thing I had to do, but it was the only way I would ever be free. I hadn't seen Rebecca since the day I walked out of her life, and in many ways I had convinced myself that I had moved on. But there was a part of me that knew I hadn't fully severed the connection. I hadn't faced the truth of everything she had done to me, the manipulation, the emotional abuse, the ways she had used my love against me. I had to tell her one last time that I was done, that I would never let her control me again. So I reached out. A simple message. "We need to talk." The reply came quickly. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." But I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I had waited too long, lived in fear for too long. I wasn't going to let her keep stealing my peace. We agreed to meet at a small park near her apartment. It was an overcast day, the sky heavy with the threat of rain, but it felt fitting. I didn't need sunlight to make this conversation easier. I just needed the strength to face it head-on. When I saw her, standing under the tree where we had once spent so many hours arguing and making up, I felt a coldness sweep over me. She hadn't changed. She still had that same manipulative look in her eyes, the same smirk that had once made me feel both loved and terrified. But this time I wasn't afraid. "Tom," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with irritation. "I didn't think you'd come. You've clearly moved on. So what's the point of this?" I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to shrink back. "No, I haven't moved on. But I've started to. And I'm done, Rebecca. You don't get to play with my life anymore. You don't get to control me. I'm not your puppet." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she seemed to falter. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just walk away from everything we built? We didn't build anything. You built a cage, and I was trapped inside it for too long," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "I let you convince me that I wasn't good enough, that I needed you. But I don't. And I never did." Rebecca laughed, a sharp, biting sound. "You really think you've won? You really think you're free?" She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. "You'll always be a part of me, Tom. No matter what you tell yourself, you'll never escape me." For a moment, I felt the old fear creeping in. Her words had always held power over me. But not anymore. Not today. "I'm already gone, Rebecca," I said, my voice firm. "And you can't bring me back. Not now. Not ever." She stood there, staring at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. But I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I had spent so many years giving her the power to control my every emotion, my every action. But now I was reclaiming that power for myself. "I'm done," I said, turning to walk away. I didn't look back. As I walked away, I felt the weight of everything lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. Truly free. The chain that had bound me to her was broken, and I wasn't going to let anything pull me back into that darkness. I had a life to rebuild, a future to create, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not Rebecca, not anyone, stand in my way. As I stood outside, the cold wind sweeping past me, I finally understood what Emily had been telling me all along. It wasn't about forgetting my past or pretending it didn't exist. It was about facing it, confronting it, and then moving forward. It was about taking control of my life, piece by piece, until I had rebuilt myself into someone I could be proud of. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Emily and I would end up together, or if I would continue on this journey alone. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I wasn't afraid of what was to come, because I had learned the most important lesson of all. I was worthy of peace, worthy of love, and worthy of a future built on my own terms. Thank you for watching this emotional journey unfold. If you've ever been trapped by someone's control or manipulation, you know how hard it can be to break free. But remember, you are stronger than you think. You are worthy of love, peace, and happiness. If the story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming darkness and finding light. You're not alone, and together we can move forward.